Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we take a look at the case of an ex-armed robber who managed to reform his life through sport in a high security prison, and also his journey at trying to bring more sports into the prison system. At 8:30 on a warm September morning in 2005, 22-year-old criminal John McAvoy was ready. He and another man were planning to raid a security van making a delivery of around £100,000 in cash in Eltham, southeast London. Mr McAvoy did not know that there was a surveillance operation watching the man he was with, Kevin Brown. For months, police had been observing him, waiting for him to commit an offence. As Mr Brown approached the van that they were targeting, Mr McAvoy, observing from his own vehicle, spotted a police car. What happened next changed his life forever. The officers jumped out with all the guns, but I managed to drive off, says Mr McAvoy. I knocked over a lamppost as I attempted to escape. They all jumped back in their cars and chased me, and I kept thinking I had to get out as fast as I could. I was fully prepared to die trying to get away, because I knew what was coming if they caught me. I was going back to that tiny segregation cell, and for a lot longer than the first time. Now on foot, Mr McAvoy ran into a dead end. With nowhere to go, he was quickly apprehended. It was all over. Mr Brown had been arrested too. Explaining what it was like to be arrested, Mr McAvoy said, "I had about 15 guns pointing at me in this little cul-de-sac, and I was face down on the floor, absolutely deflated. They put me in the back of this undercover car, and I was pretending I had concussion, because I was desperate, thinking they might take me to hospital instead and I could try and escape from there. As I was pretending to drift in and out of consciousness, the same police officer who'd arrested me the first time was calling my name. He said to me, 'John, look out the window. There were a lot of people out on the high street with their shopping bags. You will not be seeing this for a long time,' he said. I remember thinking I would do absolutely anything to swap places with those people who were walking down the high street." The 15 years that followed have led Mr McAvoy down a very different path to the one he had envisaged growing up around hardened members of the UK criminal underworld. Over the course of a life sentence, which was partly served in one of Britain's highest security prisons, it was his best friend's death in a robbery gone wrong that sparked the desire to finally rehabilitate himself. By the time of his release in 2012, Mr McAvoy had radically turned his life around, and he has since set about encouraging others to follow the same redemptive course he found in the power of sport. Now aged 37, Mr McAvoy is a sponsored triathlete who competes in Ironman events. A man who broke 3 world records and 7 British records in indoor rowing, all from the confines of a prison gym. There had been an earlier occasion in Mr McAvoy's life when he was told to look out the window. That first time was when he was a young boy, sitting in his stepfather Billy Tobin's Porsche. He did not know what he was supposed to be looking at. Mr Tobin was a notorious armed robber who engaged Mr McAvoy in a criminal apprenticeship from the age of about 8 years old. "All those people out there are sheep," Mr Tobin said. According to Mr McAvoy, who was taught that working and paying taxes would never lead to becoming a millionaire at the age of 21, like Mr Tobin had. Mr McAvoy's father had died before he was born. His uncle Mikey was involved in the Brinks Mat robbery of 1983, when a gang stole gold bullion and uncut diamonds worth £26 million from a warehouse near Heathrow Airport, one of the most dramatic heists in British history. If you'd like to know more about that, we have a video on our channel, so please go and check it out. Mr McAvoy's mother worked on minimum wage at a local florist in Crystal Palace. She was unhappy about her son's exposure to that world, but there wasn't much she could do about it. When I was a kid, My mum wouldn't even let me have a toy gun in the house to play cowboys and Indians, he said. She was so anti-gangs and anti-violence, but I was getting older and she could see I was getting pulled further and further into that world. Mr McAvoy's mum used to say, "You're an accident waiting to happen, and if you live your life in the fast lane, you will crash and burn. You'll end up how they all end up, living in a cage and going to prison." The first time Mr McAvoy was sent to jail, it didn't deter him from a life that he lived. In fact, during his time inside, he was determined not to submit to the system. "I had no fear whatsoever," Mr McAvoy says. "Prison was part of the lifestyle. Deep down in your subconscious, you have a reality that you're going to get caught. You hear someone's been arrested. You find tracking devices on your car. You know the police are watching you, and you're always trying to stay one step ahead of them." A lot of the people I was surrounded with as a young boy had been to prison, and it was all about not showing weakness and fighting, and so that's what I did. I spent a year in a segregation cell, refused to come out, exercised in my cell every day, I read books, I wouldn't interact with the prison regime, and I was as difficult as you could possibly be. The second time Mr McAvoy was arrested, his sentencing was much more robust. He was first sent to HMP Belmarsh, a high security jail. When Mr McAvoy went out to exercise in the yard for the first time, he was met by the London 21st of the 7th bombers and Abu Hamza, the notorious Islamic extremist. It was then he realised the extent of trouble that he was in. "It was like your life has been hit by a train," Mr McAvoy says. "The powers that be thought me to be such a high risk of escape that they put me with these people that were a threat to national security. I recognised all the faces from the newspaper. Abu Hamza comes up to me really polite and says, 'You've just been arrested, haven't you? Do you need anything?' I said, 'No, I'm absolutely fine, thank you.' Later that day, after returning from the shower, Mr McAvoy entered his cell to find the Quran, a packet of Weetabix and some UHT milk on his bed. Mr McAvoy says, 'It was the biggest book I've ever seen in my life.' I went back to his cell and said, 'Thank you so much, I'm absolutely fine.' And he said, 'No, brother, I'm just being polite.' I put it on his bed and I went back to my cell. Then came the moment that would change his view on the world. 3 years into his custodial sentence, Mr McAvoy was informed of the death of one of his best friends. Aaron Cloud broke his neck and died instantly when he was thrown out of a getaway car after robbing an ATM in the Netherlands. It had been a profound impact on Mr McAvoy. It was then I realised how precious life really is. I'd never lost anyone that I cared for, and suddenly my best friend dies. All the people I'd admired and looked up to since I was a little boy were just old men rotting in prison, and they'd done nothing with their lives. I got up the next morning and I was completely lost. My reputation, my name, it was meaningless. I looked at myself in that prison cell. I'd wasted my life up until that point. All of it was just down the drain. I made the decision that I'm not living this life anymore. The prison gym became Mr McAvoy's refuge. It was a way of challenging his energy into something rewarding, an escape from the toxic goings on with other inmates, a chance to do something with his time inside. Mr McAvoy discovered the indoor rowing machine, and he found he was allowed more than his allocated time outside the cell if he was training for one of the many rowing challenges, and it gave him more focus. After a few months, Mr McAvoy was at the top of the prison leaderboards. Soon, supported by prison guard Darren Davis, he trained for the 24-hour indoor rowing challenge and broke 2 world records, 100,000 meters and the furthest distance rowed in 24 hours. Mr McAvoy asked the prison library to order him stacks of books on training and sport nutrition. He wanted to learn about becoming an athlete. In total, He became the proud holder of 3 world records and 7 British records of indoor rowing, all achieved in prison. Mr McAvoy explained, "A lot of these characteristics that I had, the will to win and want to be successful, I only used to see in criminals, and suddenly there's this other group of people. The mindset was the same, but I just had to channel my energy into something positive." Mr McAvoy's progress was noted, and he was soon put up for parole, but it didn't go smoothly. When I went to my first hearing, the judge sat across the table and said to me, "What are you going to do when you get released?" I said, "I'm going to become an athlete." He was a Crown Court judge in his 70s. With his glasses on the bridge of his nose, he looked up at me with a smile on his face and said, "In all my years of sitting in parole hearings for life sentence prisoners, you are the only one who has sat in front of me and said such a thing." Mr McAvoy was absolutely convinced and adamant that he was going to do it, but he found out that his parole had been refused. However, Mr McAvoy was downgraded to an open prison system, where he could take qualifications to prepare for an early release. Mr McAvoy was released from prison in 2012, and one of the first things he did, after getting a Nando's and going to see his mum, was head to a London rowing club in Putney. He wanted to make it as a professional rower. Months later, when somebody typed his name into a search engine, headlines of his past and his mugshot came up. He decided to reveal his story and was met with an understanding, but as it turned out, he was too old to make it in rowing. He turned his attention to endurance sport and triathlon instead, landing a sponsorship from Nike in Ironman races. When the UK's national lockdown had been lifted, Mr McAvoy had ventured into the Alps for a few months to train and work on a project helping young disadvantaged British children experience similar destinations in order to broaden their horizons. In the UK, Mr McAvoy wants to continue pushing for reforms in the prison system that further focus on sport's rehabilitation role. He has his own foundation, and he is involved in several other charities including Boats Not Bars, Guns Not Gloves, and the Twinning Project. Mr McAvoy has campaigned in support of the initiative of bringing parkrun into prisons, and backed the 2018 report that recommended lifting a ban on teaching inmates boxing and martial arts. In 2019, he took up an ambassadorial role with the European Commission, seeking to encourage more people to exercise. Mr McAvoy said, "I just want to have a positive impact on the world and make up for all the wrong I've done in the past." Your view and vision of the world is very limited by what you're exposed to as a child. That criminal world has become so normalised to me that I felt that everyone else was abnormal. Now I look back on it and I can't even believe some of the things we used to do. I have to live with that every day. It's one of the conscious reasons why I do what I do now. Because they're not mistakes, they're decisions. Poor life choices based on what you know. Sport changed my life, and without it, I wouldn't be the man I am today. I am so adamant and so driven that other people get the same opportunity to turn their lives around and find purpose and direction in life. I was as bad as you can get, and if I can go through that journey and process of change, it's possible for anyone, and I am so determined to help other people get that same chance. We wish Mr McAvoy all the best in the future, and we hope that he manages to keep on the right path and help others change their life with sport. What are your opinions on some of the things that Mr McAvoy has brought up? Do you believe that sport should be more involved in prison? What are your opinions on the report that recommended lifting a ban on teaching inmates boxing and martial arts? Do you believe that setting up a martial arts or boxing competition may reduce violence in the prison? And how important do you think that exercise and taking part in sports or physical training plays a part in the rehabilitation of a prisoner? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more from Street Crime UK, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe.